In this video, we're going to be going over supply and a little bit about the equilibrium condition. So now there are some similarities between supply and demand, but there are also some important differences that we're going to note as we go through this section. This section, we're going to examine the market supply, which is the decisions of firms about how much of a product to provide at various prices. This market supply is going to be the supply of all the firms combined. Instead of looking at one individual firm, it will be the entire market for whatever good or whatever product we're looking at. Like demand, supply is not fixed, but it's determined by the price. On this slide, we have two figures. On the left, the supply schedule, and on the right, the supply curve. The supply schedule is a table that shows the relationship between the price of a product and the quantity of a product supplied. So it lists several prices of the good, and then the quantity of goods that will be sold at that price. So for instance, at $400, 6 million smartwatches will be sold. At $350, 5 million smartwatches will be sold. On the figure on the right is the supply curve. And this is a curve that graphically shows a relationship between the price of a product and the quantity of a product supplied. The same information that's contained in the supply schedule, but it's displayed graphically. We can see on the supply curve that when the price is $350, there will be 5 million smartwatches demanded. So again, it's the same exact information that's being shown on the supply schedule. The quantity supplied is the amount of a good or service that a firm is willing and able to supply at a given price. So if the price is $450 for a smartwatch, in this case, the quantity supplied will be 700 million. The law of supply is the rule that holding everything else constant, an increase in the price is going to cause an increase in the quantity supplied, and a decrease in the price will cause a decrease in the quantity supplied. We can see that relationship graphically with the supply curve, that as the price increases, the quantity supplied is going to increase. That's also shown in the supply schedule. So a change in the price is going to move the quantity supplied along the supply curve. Now, a change in something other than price, one of these other variables that affect supply, is going to cause the entire supply curve to shift. A shift to the right, in this case from curve S1 to S3, is going to increase the supply. And a shift to the left from S1 to S2 represents a decrease in supply. When the supply curve shifts, the quantity supplied will change, even if the price it's being sold at doesn't change. The quantity supplied will change at every possible price. So for instance, if the supply curve increases, we move from curve S1 to S3, and the price remains the same. In this case, it remains at P1. The quantity supplied is going to increase from Q1 to Q3. Conversely, if the supply curve shifts to the left, if we experience a decrease in supply, if we stay at that price at P1, the quantity supplied is going to decrease from Q1 to Q2. So what are these factors that influence the market supply, that shift the supply curve? This is fairly similar to the determinants that shift the demand curve. We have the prices of inputs, we have technological change, the prices of substitutes and production, the number of firms in the market, and expected future prices. Now, the ways in which these affect supply is similar to how the variables that influence the market demand influence demand. Obviously, these are different variables themselves, but it's the same basic idea, same basic concepts. The first variable that we will look at is a change in the price of inputs. Inputs are the things used in the production of a good or service. So these are things like raw materials, it can be labor, anything that's used to actually create the final product. So for a smartwatch is the example that runs through the textbook. For a smartwatch, inputs include the computer processor, plastic, and labor. So an increase in the price of an input, of anything that goes in to the production of a product, decreases the probability of selling the good. So it's going to cause a decrease in supply. So as we see the figure on the right, the top figure, the supply curve is going to shift to the left. We're going to move from S1 to S2. Now, if there's a decrease in the price of an input, this is going to increase the probability of selling a good. So therefore, we're going to see an increase in supply, and the supply curve is going to shift to the right. So in the bottom figure on the right, that represents an increase in the supply curve, a shift to the right. So This original supply curve, S1, is going to shift out to the right to the position of curve S2. The next determinant of supply that we'll look at is a technological change. So a firm may experience a positive or a negative change in its ability to produce a given level of output with a given quantity of inputs. We call this a technological change. So technological changes can be a new advancement in production methods. So maybe a more efficient method of production, like using the assembly line. It could be better technology, things that are more efficient, actual better machine being used in the production process. So for some examples, let's say a new, more productive variety of wheat. This is if farmers begin using this, if it increases yields from the same plant or the same number of seeds being planted, that's going to increase the supply of wheat. So in our figures on the right, the top right figure, it represents an increase in the supply curve. So the supply curve will shift to the right from S1 to S2 because now farms are able to produce more wheat. On the other hand, let's say in farming, there's new government restrictions that are being placed on land use for agriculture. This could decrease the supply of wheat because there's less land that's able to be used for growing wheat. In this case, this will decrease the supply curve. It will move it to the left. So the supply curve will shift from S1 to S2. Next, let's look at the price of related goods in production. So firms can produce and sell many alternate products. For example, an Illinois farmer can plant corn or soybeans. If the price of soybeans rises, that farmer will end up planting or supplying less corn. So on the right, the figure on the top right shows the supply curve for corn in this case. The supply curve is going to shift to the left. We'll see less corn being planted and sold because you can get a higher price back for growing soybeans. Sometimes two products are produced together. So, for example, cattle will provide both beef and leather. So if there's an increase in the price of beef, that is going to encourage more cattle farming. And it's going to end up increasing the supply of labor. So an increase in the price of beef is going to shift the supply curve for leather to the right. So we're going to move from S1 to S2. Now let's look at the number of firms. The more firms that we see in a market will result in more products being available at any given price. We will see a greater supply because there's more firms offering the product. If there's fewer firms, we'll end up seeing supply decrease. So the figure on the right, this shows a new firm entering the market. So following the farming examples we've been doing, if a new farmer buys a plot of land and begins growing corn to sell, we'll see the supply curve for corn shift to the right. It'll shift from S1 to S2. Finally, we have expected future prices. If a firm anticipates that the price of its product is going to be higher in the future, it might decrease its supply today in order to increase it in the future. Likewise, if a firm anticipates that the price of its product is going to be lower in the future, the price is going to go down, then it may decrease its supply today, or increase its supply today in order to decrease in the future, to sell as much as they can now while the price is still high. So this figure on the right shows what happens when a firm anticipates that the price of its product is going to be higher in the future. So in the short term, they're going to decrease the supply, shifting the supply curve to the left from S1 to S2. Now let's compare a change in supply versus a change in the quantity supplied. Important, just like for demand, to get this notation right. So a change in the quantity supplied, that's going to be a change in the price of the product being examined, which causes a movement along the supply curve. So in the figure on the right, for supply curve S1, that's going to be a shift from point A to point B. As the price increases from $400 to $450, we're going to move along the supply curve from point A to point B. So the quantity demanded in this case will increase from 5 million smartwatches to 6 million smartwatches. This is because it's a change in price. Now, if there's any other variable that changes, any of the 5 that we talked about, if any of those changes affecting supply will cause the entire supply curve to shift. This is a change in supply. So this is a movement from supply curve S1 to the curve S2. So the price will remain the same at $450, moving from point B to point C. So the quantity demanded will increase, or excuse me, quantity supplied will increase from 6 million to 8 million smartwatches. Now that we've worked with both supply and demand, it's time to put the two of them together into one graph. This is a tool that economists typically use to analyze how changes impact what's going on in the market. So the market equilibrium. This is a situation in which the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied. So the purpose of the market is to bring buyers and sellers together so that each party can make themselves better off through mutually beneficial exchange. Despite the fact that there's no central planner, no authority directing how goods are to be made, what resources are to be used where, it's not a disorderly process. It will naturally move in that direction. In the wealth of nations, Adam Smith called it the invisible hand, which will guide the proper number of goods to be produced and to be produced to be sold. Equilibrium is not a permanent condition. Once a market reaches equilibrium, it often changes. As exchanges happen, new knowledge is generated or new products are created and brought to markets. Equilibrium often changes. The market continually moves in that direction, but there's constantly new knowledge being discovered that moves it out of equilibrium. Now this invisible hand that Adam Smith talked about will encourage, like I said, the proper quantity being supplied to the market, being demanded by consumers, and doing it at the right price, or the price that maximizes both firm benefits and consumer benefits. Obviously, firms would always prefer to sell at a higher price, but their self-interest forces them to sell at a lower price that consumers will buy it at in order to maximize their profits. Likewise, consumers will love to spend less money buying goods and services, but their self-interest forces them to pay even more than the bare minimum that they want to pay for it, so that they can get those goods. Market pressures force the market towards equilibrium. They force sellers to sell at a lower price and consumers to buy at a higher price. While these supply and demand curves are not known, there's not an actual supply and demand curve for goods in each market. Firms don't know that in real time, and they can't use it to guide their production decisions. This process of moving towards equilibrium occurs as if firms and consumers knew those supply and demand curves. So here, this figure on the right, we have a market in equilibrium. So going back to the smartwatch example, at a price of $350, consumers will want to buy 5 million smartwatches, and producers will want to sell 5 million smartwatches. So we end up the same number buyers wanting to buy as much as sellers are willing to sell. So we say that the equilibrium quantity in this market is 5 million. And we say the equilibrium price in this market is $350. Since buyers and sellers want to trade the same quantity at the price of $350, we do not expect the price to change. All of the smartwatches that firms want to sell are able to be sold, and all of the smartwatches that consumers want to buy are able to be bought. Looking at market and equilibrium, that's a little bit boring. Let's see what happens when the market's out of equilibrium. How does the invisible hand work, guiding firms and consumers to pay the right price, to charge the right price, and to buy the proper amount? So let's say in this example, the price is $400. In this case, looking at the demand curve where it crosses $400, there are 4 million smartwatches being demanded. Consumers are willing to buy 4 million smartwatches. At the same time, firms are willing to supply 6 million smartwatches at $400. So in this case, there's a surplus. There are 2 million more smartwatches on the market that firms want to sell than consumers are willing to buy. A surplus, again, is a situation where the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded. So what's going to happen in this case? Firms are going to have extra smartwatches sitting around. So what they're going to do is compete amongst themselves. They're going to drive the price down, offering to sell at a lower and lower price to try to induce more customers to buy the smartwatches from them. Now let's look at another example. What if the price was $250 instead of $350? So now the price is below the equilibrium price. At $250, consumers will want to buy 7 million smartwatches. But producers are only going to want to sell 3 million smartwatches. It's going to be too expensive to bring more smartwatches to the market. In this situation, there's a shortage of 4 million smartwatches. Again, a shortage is a situation in which the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied. There are not enough smartwatches to go around for all the people that want to buy smartwatches. So what's going to happen here? Sellers will realize that they can increase the price and still sell as many smartphones. So what's going to happen is they're going to increase the price. As they increase the price, it now becomes profitable to produce more smartwatches. So it's going to increase the supply. So we'll move up along the supply curve towards the equilibrium. So supply and demand both count. They matter equally for determining the equilibrium price and quantity. Price is determined by the interaction of buyers and sellers, not just one side. Neither group is able to dictate the price in a competitive market. So this is in a market where there's many buyers and sellers. However, changes in supply and changes in demand will affect the price and the quantity traded.